Hi, thank you for joining this morning. I'm Ashley Jones, D&I Program Manager here at F5. Thank you for joining us today for a very inspiring keynote from Minda Harts. Minda Harts is a workplace and equity consultant. She's also the best-selling and award-winning author of The Memo and Right Within. Her third book, You Are More Than Magic for Young Adults, will be released in spring of 2022. Minda is a professor at NYU and Wagner. She is a frequent guest on MSNBC and featured on ABC News, Forbes, Fast Company, and Time Magazine. Minda is a highly sought after speaker for companies such as Liberty Mutual, American Family Insurance, Nike, Google, and Salesforce. In 2020, she was named the top voice for equity in the workplace by LinkedIn. Minda also hosts a live weekly podcast called Secure the Seat. Minda, thank you for being here today. We are so happy to have you. I'm sorry, I know we had a couple of technical difficulties getting you in and getting you joined in, but thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. Honored to be here with all of you. I know that you could be anywhere right now and you're here with us, so I don't take that lightly. So should I begin?
Yes. We're dying to hear from you.
Okay, great. Well, happy that you're all here. I know I can't see everybody's face, but I hope that you will use the chat if you have access to it, just to let me know that maybe you're resonating with some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But I think it's really important for origin stories before we jump into some of the tangible tips that I hope that you all will put inside of your toolkit. But actually, tomorrow, my new book, You Are More Than Magic, The Black and Brown Girl's Guide to Finding Your Voice, releases tomorrow with Penguin Teen. So spring is officially here. So the book launches tomorrow. So I'm super excited to be here with all of you. Again, my name is Minda Harts, and oftentimes I'm like, how did I get here? And, I was a first generation college student, first person in my family to graduate from college, and the first person in my family to enter into a corporate role. And so when you are the first, you don't always have the insight that some of our counterparts have on how to navigate office dynamics and all of those sorts of things. And, I was under the assumption, like many of us, that when we enter into a workplace, we function under a meritocracy, meaning that if you do the job, you do good, then you get an opportunity to, bite the apple, right? You get a seat at the table. But what I realized was there was a lot of different things going on inside the workplace that I was not prepared for. And just because you work the hardest doesn't always mean that you get your seat at the table. There's so many other dynamics that are happening. And I wish that I had known some of them at play, because I think I would have been much more prepared to navigate the workplace had I had them. And it's really the reason why I created the tools that we'll talk about today. But when I entered into corporate America, I was the only. And if any of you have ever been the only of anything, then you know how isolating that can be. And I was the only Black woman, the only woman of color, and in some spaces, the only woman. And being 23, 24 in my first professional role, it was a lot. I entered into the workplace already knowing that I could not be myself, right? Have you ever entered into something knowing that you don't even have the privilege of being able to be who you need to be for yourself, but you're constantly thinking about how you adapt and shape into what others would have you be, kind of assimilate, if you will. And one of the things that I did early on in my career was decide to use Minda, because I knew that using Minda would be more palatable to dominant culture. It kind of sounds like Linda, so it'd just be very easy for people to say, and there wouldn't be any, issues for me. And so many of us have to make those sorts of decisions early on before we're actually doing the actual job. We have to think about how people are going to be pronouncing our names, all of these different things that many don't even realize. It's not as simple as somebody, at birth being named Robert, and then they decide that they want to be called Bobby or Bob, right? It's very easy, but we don't always get the luxury of being able to, go in and out of those things. And so one of the things that I remember being in that environment was just feeling like I didn't have a voice. And if you get nothing out of our conversation today, I hope you get this one thing. You have a voice. You just have to decide how you want to use it. And when I entered into the workplace, I started to silence myself. My first manager, we'll call him Chad, he said that he saw that I had burnt orange fingernail polish on. And he said, "You people love your bright colors." And he joked around for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. This is my manager. I didn't feel like I could say anything. I didn't know what to say. I was actually shocked that he said it. And that was when I realized that I can't say anything, because if I say something, then I'm the one that took it the wrong way. I'm angry, I'm feisty, I'm docile. And all of these different things inside the workplace are starting to shape how we show up. It's starting to shape if we say anything or not. And 9 times out of 10, we don't say anything and we just sweep it under the rug, right? And we start to tell ourselves this story that they didn't mean any harm. And 2 things can be true at the same time. Someone might not have meant harm, but the impact to you and your mental health can be harmful. And so I think it's really important for us to understand the difference between the 2. And from that day forward, I never said anything. And oftentimes I think about, had I said something, saying what I mean without saying it mean, right? Creating a boundary with my manager, even though the power dynamics were quite interesting. Had I said something, maybe he would never make another Black or brown person feel bad about their bright colors again, but I didn't, right? And oftentimes we lean into caution versus courage, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But I went on to work under him for a very long time. And again, I silenced my voice at the expense of my own well-being. I would see my colleagues be able to say what they needed to say, and they're taking the initiative. But the moment that I thought about even saying something, then I'm the aggressive one. And so I just decided it wasn't worth the fight, right? We can all be working at the same place and experience that workplace differently. And so I was experiencing the workplace differently, but I settled into it. I said, you know what, this must just be how it is for Black and brown people, or anybody who feels like they're on the margins, right? If you're over 50, you're LGBTQIA, able-bodied, a veteran, however you might identify, when you're one of few, you often just feel like this is it, right? And so I had told myself that this is just how it's going to be for a Black woman in the workplace. And so I put my seatbelt on and I settled into it. And I remember seeing a demonstration happen outside of my window. So 10 years or so had passed, and I had settled into this inequality in the workplace. We didn't have the words micro and macroaggressions back then. I just felt racism and sexism all the time. And I just, again, thought that's how the workplace worked. And we didn't have psychological safety as a word back then. And so again, I just felt like this must just be status quo. But it wasn't until the murder of Trayvon Martin, there was a demonstration taking place outside my window of where I worked. And I saw this sign that said Black Lives Matter. It was the first time that I had kind of noticed it. And it made me start to interrogate and investigate what Black Lives Matter could mean inside the workplace. What could it mean for us to be represented in the About Us pages of our companies? What could it mean for us in regard to pay equity? What could it mean in relation to promotion and advancement, or who gets to go to HR and feel safe and who doesn't? I started to think about those things inside the workplace, and it really made me think about, wow, we really can be working at the same place and experience it differently. So I have colleagues that will say, oh no, racism doesn't exist here, or sexism doesn't exist here, or this doesn't exist here. But they would never know that if they've never had to walk in our shoes. They would never have to experience that, right? So we could be working somewhere where many of us never experience those things, but then we have colleagues that experience them every single day, or we have people that reporting to us that experience them every single day. So the goal isn't necessarily to demonize someone because, they're racist or sexist or homophobic. It's about how do we remove barriers for people instead of creating more, right? So if someone does come and tell you that this landed on me a certain way, what would it look like if we listened to them with courage, right? Because it takes a lot of courage for someone to come to you and tell you that they're experiencing some discomfort inside the workplace. One definition of courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. If somebody comes and tells you something, they probably have been experiencing it for a very long time before they got the courage to come and tell you about it. So what would it look like if we met them with the same courage and we're a courageous listener, right? We hear them out. That we think about what can we do to remove this barrier and not make it about us. They're not saying that I am, but they're making me aware. I should be grateful that they feel safe enough to tell me so that I don't keep harming them in this way. Again, intent versus impact. I did not mean for it to come out that way, but that's how it landed, right? And now I need to take ownership of that so we can move forward, right? And I think that's really important for us to hear those things, because I think sometimes when we have these difficult conversations in the workplace, because we don't have the tools to be able to articulate and manage through conflict resolution, then it becomes egos get in the way, right? And now we're making it about us instead of making it about removing the barrier. And so as I was thinking about this in my career, I thought, wow, what would it look like if everybody in the workplace got to experience dignity, equity, humanity, and respect, right? That should be table stakes in the workplace. But I wasn't always getting that like some of my colleagues were. And so I stayed at one company for about almost 11 years, thinking that I could change the system, thinking that it was going to get better. And eventually it started to impact how I saw myself, how I worked. No, I was never the angry Black woman at work, but you best believe I probably was angry when I got back home, right? Because I felt all of these different things inside the workplace. And now the people that love me are not getting the best of me. So it's really important that we understand how to handle these things so that we could show up and be our healthiest self. People will say, bring your authentic self to work. But when we address some of these issues, we can bring our most healthiest self. And when our healthiest self arrives, then we're be able to be authentic as well. But one of the things as I was grappling with, I'm like, you know what, I can't change this environment. I need to leave. But while I was there, one of the things that made the 10 years bearable, 11 years bearable, was building relationships. When I first entered into the workplace, I was told, just work hard, Minda, and keep your head down. Don't rock the boat, right? The famous top hits, don't rock the boat, keep your head down, work really hard. And as I'm playing those greatest hits, I'm realizing that my colleagues are actually moving up the ladder faster than me, but not because they weren't working hard as me. On paper, I was outshining everybody, but I didn't have the relationships that some of them had, right? To articulate my value and quantify my worth. Meaning that we could be doing all this really great work, but if no one ever knows that you're doing it, then what good is it, right? Oftentimes we think when we're working really hard that then somebody will come and tap us on the shoulder and say, wow, Minda, you ready for that promotion? You ready for that increase? And half the time they don't even know, our managers aren't even aware sometimes of what we're doing if we don't articulate that. I used to think that, well, they know that I must want more, right? But if I never say that, then how will they know, right? So part of our career advancement isn't just waiting for somebody to notice what we're doing, but us letting them know what we want, right? What are our short-term and our long-term career goals so that people know how to help us, right? Our success is not a solo sport. I don't know anybody who's got up the ladder by themselves, right? And so one of the things that I noticed in the workplace is that some of my colleagues, they were going to happy hours and all these sorts of activities outside of the workplace. And I know it's a little bit different in a virtual environment, but people are still meeting, right? People are still getting promoted. So we want to make sure that we're building those relationships, building our squad. I talk about in the memo is making sure that you have people on your team that are speaking your name in the rooms that you're not in, right? And so I, again, saw my colleagues and I kept thinking, what are they doing that I'm not doing? Because they clearly aren't doing what I'm doing and they're getting ahead, right? And I realized that they were at the places to hear about what's coming down the pipeline. Some of the most senior leaders got to know them in ways that they didn't get to know me. So when opportunities came about, they weren't thinking about me because they weren't seeing me outside of maybe my cube or things. And so, yes, I didn't want to go celebrate Bob's birthday in the break room. Yes, I did not want to go to the happy hours. Those are things I did not want to do at all. Barely making it through the workday. But what I realized was if I wanted to get ahead at this particular company, then I needed to make some allies. I needed to potentially identify a sponsor. I needed those sorts of things. I wasn't going to these events because I wanted to be the life of the party, because I want everybody to like me. I went with strategy in mind. And I think oftentimes when we're thinking about our next steps, you'll hear that saying, make your next move your best move. Well, oftentimes in the workplace, you're going to need people in these different areas to be able to help you make your next move, right? And once I realized that, I don't have to go and talk to everybody, but if I do go to karaoke, let me get my karaoke song, do my song, right? Mine was Taylor Swift, by the way. And, and I would do my thing, and then people would see me in a different way. Right? They got to know me. And then I strategized, who do I need to talk to while I'm at this thing? So now we're in a virtual environment. So yes, we may not be going to the happy hours per se, but there's still events like this, right? How can I put my name in the chat so people can see me, that I'm present? What are the questions that I need to ask in this meeting so that people see? Do I need to arrive 5 minutes before so that I show my face, so that people are still thinking about me for these opportunities? And so again, I want you to know that in order to move forward, yes, the model has shifted. Our work environment might have changed, but the way that you climb up is still through social capital. And social capital is very, very important. And so one of the things that I identified, I used to work on the floor with the second most senior man at the company. And if I was waiting on Chuck to come tap me on the shoulder and talk to me, I've been still sitting in my cube right now with a mask on or something, right? But I realized that I'm gonna have to let him know what good looks like to me. So when I'd see him in the hallway, no longer when he said, "Hey, Minda, how you doing?" I'd say, "Oh, good," and keep it moving. I would leverage those opportunities that I got with him, right? So it wasn't just when he did say something, I'd say, "Oh, actually, I'm working on this really great project," or blah, 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 right? I'm dropping those seeds. And eventually those seeds turned into my harvest, because one meeting that Chuck was in, he was in a senior staff meeting. Everybody's looking the way he does. Everybody identifies very similarly racially. And he said that the CEO of the company couldn't make it to close this big deal. And through the conversations I had been having with Chuck, he remembered that my territory was San Francisco. And lo and behold, the CEO was supposed to go close a big client contract in San Francisco, and no one on the staff, they all had, other engagements, so nobody could go. And so she said, maybe we'll just cancel it. And everybody's like, no, we need this to close out the year. And Chuck said, you know what? I think Minda can do it. And everyone in that room was like, she's too junior. We don't know her, all the things, right? He said, well, I think she just needs the opportunity, and I believe she can do it. And I'm going to put my neck out on the line for her. If it doesn't work out, then fine, right? And so I'm already on my business trip. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. I was there. I got this call from Chuck. He said, "Hey, kid, we need you to go over and handle this. This is your shot," right? And like Hamilton, I didn't give away my shot. I knew how important it was to have that moment, right? Had I not built that relationship, he wouldn't have spoke my name in that room. He wouldn't have thought of me, right? I didn't know that he had an opportunity in that moment to be a sponsor. We never know, right? But what we do, I can control what I do, can't control what somebody else does, right? But I was advocating for myself. Self-advocacy is part of self-love. How can people know what good looks like if you don't tell them the good that you're doing, right? So I was doing what I normally did. And then when I got that call, I went, closed that deal. And a few months later, I was sitting in the same room as Chuck. It didn't take his seat away by amplifying me. He was able to add another seat. And it really changed my career and my money for good. I was really, really happy. I got promoted, and I was able to shine in a way that I wasn't before. And that's something that, if we have any, I don't know if we have any allies in the room or managers, but thinking about how you can invest in someone else's success, right? Are we only saying the people who look like us or remind us of our younger self, or are we giving someone else an opportunity to slam dunk too? And I'm forever grateful for Chuck, because I know that changed the trajectory of my career. And it's a privilege when somebody does that, right? And Chuck was like 40 years older than me. We wouldn't have probably like hung out or thought that we had much in common. But the more we got to know each other, the more we got to build relationship, the more we built social capital, we saw that we did have more in common than not. And part of that was me articulating my value and quantifying my worth, right? I didn't ask him to sponsor me. I didn't ask him to say my name in the room, but through the conversation, through going out after 6 or whatever have you, people saw me in a different way. And it really, really helped my career. Despite some of the other pain points that I was experiencing, that really helped, right? And so I just want you to think about, who do you need on your squad? Who are those people that you could start building relationships with? Is it someone in HR? Is it your manager? Is it someone in the tech? Is it when you're thinking about your short-term and long-term goals, you're thinking, you know what, I may not want to be in this department, but there's another department that I'm thinking about. Who do I need to start building relationships with so they think of me for these opportunities? And then on the flip side, who can we be speaking someone else's name in the rooms that we're in, right? Because we can also be allies and sponsors to each other as communities of color. And I think that that's really important. We don't have to wait on dominant culture to say our names in the rooms. We can amplify each other as well. So just something that, to think about. But when I left that current environment, I ended up going to a new environment, and I stayed at that place for 11 years. And then I found a new place because I said, well, maybe I've outgrown this, right? I no longer want to just survive at work, but I want to know what it's like to thrive. And so I went to another location at a different company, and they said all the right things. They said diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, all the letters, they're here. I had never heard that before. So I'm like, sign me up. And, but I entered into another environment where I was the only. And I knew what that felt like, but at least they were talking the language that I thought might be better. But what I realized was just because someone says something, you also have to look at the demonstration. Is that core pillar value being demonstrated in what we say? It's not enough to just say that these things are here if you can't feel it, and I ended up going into a new environment, and it was actually worse than the last one that I was in, unfortunately. And it actually, I'd be in some meetings and people, instead of calling me Minda, I already boiled it down to like the easiest thing that you could say. They would say, what does the Black girl think? And people would think that that was funny and cute. And again, I found myself in a space where my voice was silenced. I didn't feel safe enough to be able to say anything or do anything. And when I did have, kind of side conversations, then people would just always say, well, they didn't mean any harm. That's just Carrie being Carrie and all of those sorts of things. Or they would come behind after the fact and say, oh, I can't believe she said that. You're so strong. And I used to find some comfort in those side conversations because I thought, well, I'm not making this up, right? This is happening. And sometimes when you're one of few, you'll constantly question yourself as to, did that happen or not, right? And I think that that's a dangerous place to be, because now we're looking for someone else to tell us if humanity, dignity, respect should be accessible to us, right? And one of the things that I want to share in this moment, when you're actually going through one of these things, oftentimes we're looking around the room, or we're in these, video conferences, and somebody will say something and you're waiting on somebody to call it out, or you're waiting for someone to acknowledge it. And sometimes people just have not found their courage yet to do it. All right. And what does it look like if we lean into our courage? And one thing in my new book, Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace, is a framework called the affirmation pyramid. Because sometimes we're in these environments and no one is ever going to affirm you or call it a thing, right? But we can affirm ourselves. And part of our healing journey, part of our being able to create boundaries, is also acknowledging that these things have happened. Because I spent 15 years in corporate America. For a good 13 of them, I swept everything under the rug. And who benefits from that? It surely didn't benefit me, right? It actually made things worse on how I saw myself and how I showed up in different spaces. But one of the things in the affirmation pyramid that I want to share with you, because sometimes our colleagues are not their healthiest, right? And they're operating off of old tools too, and they don't have any new tools, but we don't have to let that dictate how we move forward, how our careers progress, right? Lauryn Hill said, how you going to win if you ain't right within? I can't dictate if people go to the allyship webinars. I can't dictate if they take the unconscious bias training or not, but I can control how I show up and what I do and what I say, right? Again, saying what I mean without saying it mean. Why is it that our colleagues can say what they need to say without any backlash, and they half the time are not saying, they're saying it mean, right? Why can't we be able to show up and let people know what good looks like to us? But first off, number one, when you're experiencing a micro or macro aggression in the moment, you can pause. You don't necessarily have to respond in that moment, right? You could breathe in, breathe out. Take inventory of how it's making you feel. Number two, acknowledge. Again, we can't confront what we won't name. And half the time we won't even name the thing to ourselves. I may not say it out loud. I may not go to HR. I may not go to my manager, but I first have to acknowledge what good looks like to me. Right? I can't participate in my own oppression by saying that these things are okay or that nobody meant harm, because it's impacting me, right? And so number one, I'm acknowledging it to myself, because that's part of being healthy, acknowledging when harm has been caused. Number three, I'm documenting it, because again, I may never go to HR, I may never go to my manager, but I need to document it for myself, to release myself so that I'm not constantly questioning what these things are. So Now I'm writing it down. I'm releasing myself of it. If I ever need to pull the receipt, then I actually have it. No, I don't feel that this was racist just because I felt that way. Actually, this is what was said in Zoom room 3 at 12:59. Right? He said, "You people like your bright colors." That's what was said. So and now I can see if there's a pattern. Okay. And if you ever need to use it, you have it, if nothing else, for your sanity, to let you know that you didn't create the situation. Number 4 which is really important, is redistribute. Oftentimes we hold on to that energy, right? So when someone says the thing, then we think about it all day long, ruminating, right? I was a big time ruminator. I don't know if we have anybody who currently joined the Church of Rumination, but I used to ruminate on that thing all day long, right? I'd go from one meeting to the next, wondering, why did they say that? What did they mean? And then I'd go back home and I'd be thinking about it there, right? Or we're at home, so you go to the kitchen, you're thinking about it there. And you can't even sleep because you're thinking about what was said. And all of that toxicity is now in your mind and in your body. And chronic stress leads to diseases and all sorts of things if we don't release ourselves of that. And so what would it look like to redistribute that energy while I'm thinking about it all day long, put it into something else? I'm working out, I'm eating healthy, I'm not holding on to someone else's luggage and baggage, right? And so what I found was why I can't sleep at night. Carla, she's living her best life. She's watching Tinder Swindler and Venting Anna, The Dropout, she's watching all her shows. She's eating her favorite snacks, and I'm sitting, barely can think, because I'm thinking about her. So I needed to redistribute that energy because it's not serving me, right? I'm not going to participate in my own oppression with this. And then lastly is affirm. You may not have anybody else in there to tell you that it wasn't right or whatever, but you can affirm yourself. What is it that you need to say to yourself? You couldn't have worked harder. You couldn't have done anything differently. You shouldn't have been exposed to that to begin with. So fill yourself back up, right? There's tools that we can use in the moment, right? And then the more that we start to affirm ourselves, then we don't let these things chip away at us each and every time. Because when these situations would happen, it would paralyze the rest of my day. And I refuse. You know what? I guard my mental health like it's a full-time job. I refuse to let anything dismantle what I've worked hard to create, which is my most healthiest self, right? And I want you to be able to meet your most healthiest self, but you first have to acknowledge that sometimes harm has happened. Maybe it hasn't happened recently, but you have to go back and release some things, right? Erykah Badu said in her song Bag Lady, one day all those bags gonna get in your way, so pack light. What is it that you need to release so that you can be your healthiest self, right? You may never get the apology. You may have the conversation and they still tell you that you took it the wrong way, but you don't have to internalize that. You let them know what good looks like to you. And I think it's really, really important to do that. And so when I was in in that new environment, it took me a while to figure out that I needed to guard my mental health, but it was fragile. And I didn't realize from all of the past 10, 11 years of, racialized experience and sexism, I carried it to the next job and I experienced it more, right? And then I finally, as I told you at the beginning of our conversation, that you have a voice, you just have to decide how you want to use it. For so long, I thought I couldn't say anything, that I just had to make everything work. And it came to a point where I had to lean into that courage, the ability to do something that frightens one. And I realized that nobody around me, not even my manager, was going to do what needed to be done. And so I went and had a conversation for myself with the most senior woman at the company. And I said, I have only been here a year. It's been very taxing and troubling. And I need your support because I'm experiencing a lot of racialized aggression that I did not take this job to experience. Can you help me remove some of these barriers? And it took a lot of courage for me to do that, because at that point I was pretty fragile. A lot of things had just compounded and it really was affecting me. And she said that there's nothing she could do about it, that I'm doing a really great job, but the person that's causing this harm, they've been here for a very long time. The clients love them. So I need to decide if this is where I need to be or not. And I remember just feeling so defeated in that moment because I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to say, this person is one of the youngest here. She's doing a great job. This should not be a barrier. Her color or her gender shouldn't be a barrier inside the workplace. But she wasn't able to meet me with the same courage. Because she was good friends with this person. So again, if we're talking about ethics, you can still have two things can be true at the same time. You can have a relationship with someone outside of work, but when we are inside of the company, ethics should be at play. We should hold people to a higher standard, right? And she wasn't able to do that. And I remember just feeling so defeated because I was kind of at my wit's end. And I remember when she told me that, I was pretty fragile at that time. And I did not cry in her office, although I did feel like it because I just had, I'd moved my life. This was my dream job. And I just felt like it was like slipping through my hands. I worked really hard to get that seat at the table. And I often in that moment thought if I had been another color, maybe she would have cared a little bit more, but she didn't. And I remember leaving, which is really pivotal, leaving her office and grabbing my stuff. And I go out to my car. And when I get in the car, I cry, right? And I cry because I had done everything that dominant culture had said do. I had gone to college. I have code switched. I'd worn my hair the straightest it could be. I'd stayed up Sunday nights till, 6 a.m, taking out my black girl vacation braid so that I could flat iron my hair and make it to the office on Monday so it wouldn't be a topic of conversation. I had done everything, right? And still met with no dignity, humanity, equity, or respect. And I remember it was 2014. I cried in that car, not just for myself, but I cried for my great-grandmother. I cried for my grandmother. I cried for my mother because we had all experienced racism in the various sectors that we worked at. And I thought, at what point does this end, right? Or any inequality. And I thought about in that car, as I cried, I just thought I didn't know what else to do. I felt like, and I couldn't quit because oftentimes we're in situations and we can't quit, right? Where we feel that we can't. And I remember thinking in the car that day in 2014 about courage. And that's why I use it in a lot of my talks, because I thought about, I have two choices. We all have two choices. We can lean into our courage or we can lean into our caution, but nobody benefits when we're cautious. And I thought about how many women had come before me, Black women, brown women, just all women who leaned into their courage so that I could show up in the workplace a little bit better than they were, right? And I thought about that in the car. And I thought, wow, I'm a beneficiary of so many people's courage, right? And I thought about a lot of people use their courage for things that they didn't even get to experience themselves. And I thought in that car, as I cried and felt like, my lashes were on the ground, I was like, who's going to be a beneficiary of my courage? What am I going to do to make the workplace better than I found it? And I didn't have an answer in 2014, but I sat in my car and I thought about that. And I remember turning on the radio, and as tears are in my eyes, I turned on the radio, and Whitney Houston's "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" comes on the radio. And at that point, I'm laughing and crying, and I'm like, wow, God, you have such a funny sense of humor. And I thought, where did the broken hearts go of women of color when we can't take the workplace anymore? There's no soft space to land. There's no HR department that says, let's figure this out, rarely. And I said, you know what? I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to figure out how to make the workplace better than I found it, because I want people to be a beneficiary of my courage. I want to be able to speak truth to power for those who have not found their voices yet. But again, we all have our voice. We just have to decide how we want to use it. And when you think about your careers, when you think about what you're going to do next, if you're going to create a boundary with a colleague, if you're going to say what you mean without saying it mean, you're not only doing it for you, you're doing it for the next generation too, because we don't want them to experience some of the inequalities that we have to, right? We want them to be able to take their seat at the table and not question why they've been asked to be there, right? We want to remove those barriers for them. And as I sat in that car in 2014, I didn't have an answer, but I said that I will commit the rest of my career to figure out how to make the workplace better for people who look like me, for anybody who's felt isolated, for anybody who's felt on the margin. I want them to have the playbook. I want them to have the freedom, no longer feeling confined, the way that many of our colleagues get to experience the workplace. And 2015, I started my company, The Memo. In 2019, I put out my first book by Hachette Book Group called The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. It became a bestseller. It was the first book by a major publisher that talked about the experiences of women of color in the workplace, because even as women, we don't experience the workplace the same. And then my next book came out at the end of last year called Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace. And tomorrow, my third book, You Are More Than Magic, Black and Brown Girls Guide to Finding Your Voice. I wanted people to be a beneficiary of my courage. And I hope that as you think about where you take your career, you'll ask yourself, who's going to be a beneficiary of your courage? Because not you get to be you get to benefit, but somebody else does too.
Wow, that is so great and so inspiring, Minda. That, I mean, everything that you had to say, and we already have the chat has been going off the entire time. You know, everybody's really loving all the tips and everything that you bring to this, and your own personal experience as well. And we already have a question in the Q&A. So definitely want to get to that. But before we get to that question, Joshua, I just wanted to ask you, because you spent a lot of time on, you know, building your squad and creating, you know, social capital, networking. F5, here at F5, we do have a mentorship and sponsorship programs. And what would be your advice, you know, to this group of people for when we're seeking a mentor or a sponsor at work, and keeping that relationship going much longer than, you know, the initial, you know, 6 months or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, thank you for inviting me to be in this space and have this conversation. You know, I think it's really important to start to build relationships, right? Start to build your social capital. Again, I know it may look differently because we don't have those organic kind of water cooler moments that we used to have in the hallways or those sorts of things. But now I feel like we can even ask people for 15 minutes of their time, and be thoughtful about how you're asking for time, not just to you kind of sit and drink coffee, but have those questions about that are beneficial, that get you closer to your short-term and your long-term career goals. Like, what are those things? What stretch assignments? When you meet with your manager, you know, maybe they don't have an agenda for you, but you can bring the agenda and say, hey, can you partner on the road to success with me? This is where I see my career here. You know, I want to be in management. What are some things that I can do right now to get there? And I think as we start to kind of assess, you have to get to know people so that you know who could potentially be a sponsor or a mentor or those sorts of things. And so again, use these opportunities here, even in the chat, right? Maybe, again, you might work at the same place, but you may not even know each other. So maybe there's someone that said something in the chat today that resonated with you. This is a really great opportunity for you to find them in the directory or whatever and say, hey, I saw that you attended the talk today. I love what you had to say. Would love to talk about this, right? Or you get the recording of this and you send it to your manager. Hey, there were some things that I think could be helpful for our team that I wanted you to listen to this, right? Or whatever the case. But I think we first have to put ourselves out there in ways, right? And kind of think through, who do we need on our team? If you are the captain of your team, who could add as players, right? And you start to build relationships. And so I think that we all have the capacity to do that. We just have to think through. And to your point, some people may stay on our team for a long time, right? Or maybe some people give us one bit of advice and then we never hear from them again. But I also think when you do build relationships with people, the best piece of advice that I could give is your follow-up. So if you did have a conversation with them, what would it look like to say a month or two later, hey, thank you again for making that time for me. Just wanted to give you an update on where I am with that, right? Because I know so many people reach out to me and they, when I'm able to have conversations one-on-one with people, but then I give advice and I never know what happens after that. It's like, did it pan out? Did it work? And I think that's how you continuously keep the relationship going so that you're not reaching out to people only when you need something, right? Because we want to make sure that reciprocity is taking place too.
Yeah. Or even sometimes, like if you respond like in writing, sometimes you might even get a little bit more clarity, right? Like you sometimes might hear something and, hey, just want to follow up and make sure that this is what we were talking about. This is kind of what I was thinking of doing. Was that right? Or did I hear that right? I have a bunch of questions for you, but I know that our audience has questions. So I have Joshua that asked, I have team members who are introverts and struggle with growing their social capital. Any advice for them, and or any advice as a coworker where I can help them? So that kind of fits into what we just talked about.
Absolutely. Let me tell you all something right now. I am an introvert at the core
Really?
of it. Okay, I am. If you knew me in my personal life, I'm very much an introvert. But what I found was that I didn't want that to dictate my career success, right? And so yes, I don't have to be everybody's best friend in the room, but what are the things that I am comfortable with? What is authentic to me to show up in the ways that I need to? Because I know that, again, our voice, when I looked at my short-term and long-term career goals, and I thought about whose seat would I like to kind of have, and not take it away from them, but who do I want, that's the person that I would like to aspire to be. I thought about something. And one of the things that I noticed about people is they were using their voices. And I thought, because I'm very shy. And I was like, I don't want my shyness or anything to make people think that I can't do the job, right? Or that I can't say what I need to say or present something. And so I needed to rebrand myself in certain ways. Again, it's not necessarily that you have to be an extrovert to be successful. I think that we also have to, as allies of each other or managers of others, say, okay, what do I need to help Minda with so that she can be her best self on this team, right? So yes, in a meeting, she might not be the first person to say the thing. Minda, we were just having a conversation last week. Could you talk more about blah, 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 right? Knowing that as a team member, maybe I've been trying to come off mute for the last 10 minutes, but people are talking over me. As a team member, you could say, someone who always might have the microphone or able to use their voice in that way, Minda, I noticed that you've been trying to come off mute for the last 10 minutes. Did you have something you wanted to add to this conversation? Like, we're assisting our colleagues in ways where we know that they may not feel the most, comfortable. And I think that's part of also being a good manager, a good colleague, to notice that, okay, just because someone always has a question to ask or always has their hand up doesn't mean that that's the person that should be getting promoted, right? But everybody has different skill sets. One thing that I'll say is, it's almost like a car ride. If we're all riding to the same place, we might experience that car ride differently, right? Someone in the front seat might say, oh, I always have access to X, Y, and Z. But someone who sits in a different seat, they experience it differently. And maybe they don't have the opportunities to drive or change the channel on the music or something like that. So what can we do from where we sit to be able to say, what can I do to make someone else's seat safer, but also amplify them, right? Because again, some of us, it's second nature to show up and sing all the karaoke songs or say, give our opinions on the thing. But we know that we have colleagues who, they have great ideas, but they're not going to be the first one to initiate that. And so I think, again, looking around the room and saying, how can I be supportive in the different ways? Oftentimes when we think about allyship, we think about it as like this one thing, right? You're only calling someone out when they said something or done something, but it's also setting people up for success, knowing where their strengths lie, and helping them achieve that. And so I think it's really important. And I think as leaders, we can't always be looking for the person that's always doing this, right? Because there are people who are a little more cautious about how they engage. And we also have to realize that those people bring just as much value as a person that's always raising their hand.
Yeah. And everything you said about, watching, being observant, like trying to see somebody come off mute, because nowadays we're all in these Zoom meetings and, it's such a different environment than being able to be all together. And it makes it that much harder for somebody that is an introvert to kind of come off mute, everybody's listening to you, watching you, and you can't get it to work. That always happens to me. I always have technical difficulties.
Yes. You feel like you feel like you're on Jeopardy, like who can hit the button the fastest, and you're not always going to be able to do that. And so being aware, culturally, competent of what's happening.
Yeah. You're like, hands are shaking and trying to get to it. So during your keynote, you definitely talked about like office politics, right? And like being new, like when you're new to your job there. And so, for our audience, what is your advice for when you're coming into the office, and how do you get that like lay of the land sort of thing? Because in the memo, you definitely talk about there's also office politics everywhere you go, and needing to learn how to play the game. So how do you kind of get that lay of the land, so to speak, when you're coming in, you might be new, or you just never really thought about playing the game before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important also to, for people who might have been hired, during the pandemic, they may have never actually met their colleagues or managers in face to face, right? And so there's a lot of things that even just we may not know going back into the office that a lot of people already know. And so I think that that's part of where I think onboarding is really important. And I think sometimes a missed opportunity during the onboarding process is to actually not just know where the bathrooms are, but where certain, who do you go to for certain things, right? And I think building that community within the environment is team lunches are all good, but also making sure that you're pairing somebody with someone who could also be helpful to navigate. When I entered into the workforce, I didn't have that person, to tell me. I made some mistakes and learned along the way. And I think that it's unfortunate because a lot of sometimes Black and brown people were entering these spaces, and we may not have relatives who gave us the blueprint as we entered into the workplace. And so I think it's important, again, we could all be working at the same place and experience that workplace differently. And we have different competencies, right? And understanding that as well. But I do think that part of it is also why building your squad, building your relationships are so important, because as you get to know people, you're going to know who you should go to for things. You're going to know who that office gossip is that you don't want to engage in that type of activity, right? But you're not going to know these things until you start to get to know people, right? So asking for that 15-minute coffee or having conversation, virtual coffee or whatever have you, going to the different events, because you also get to see people don't just get to know you get to know who you can trust and who you can't, right? When I used to go to some of these like birthday lunches and things like that, I had to reframe it like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to see who's doing what when, who can I trust? Who knows, who can introduce me to other people, those sorts of things. Also, being part of your employee resource group or your business resource group, joining those, right? Those are other ways to be able to tap into community to find out, what the lay of the land, but we're not going to necessarily know by just keeping to ourselves. And so if there are points of entry, take advantage of those so that it's for you, it's for the intel. Sometimes we do things because we don't feel like it, but realize that this is actually benefiting us when we have all of the necessary information to be able to make decisions on, who could be a mentor, those sorts of things. And so I think it's really imperative that we do that. But then also, if you see someone who's new, what would it look like for us to be proactive instead of reactive, making sure that people have, maybe when they first start at the company, giving books like the memo, right? Giving them resources so that people know what to expect and are kind of thinking through those things ahead of time.
Yeah. Or even like, if you're someone that has been there for a while, making introductions, because, like you said, relationships are a big deal. So as an ally, helping someone new, like, hey, this person's really great for XYZ and will help you get this through, or, helping make those introductions. We had another question in the chat or in the Q&A. So I wanted to ask you this. Let's see. There are cultural barriers to building social capital. In my personal life, self-promotion, speaking out, and brand management is not rewarded. It is tedious and feels like I'm constantly trying to fit into a space that doesn't feel healthy or natural. It is stressful. How do I cope?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely, I would pick up Right Within, How to Heal From. Even if you haven't experienced racial trauma, if you experienced any trauma in the workplace, it's tools that can help with that. But I think part of it is asking ourselves why. why are we engaging in this way? What is it that we want to get out of it, right? And are we, again, navigating with the right people? And so part of brand management, I think, is where, again, understanding what our career goals are. So for example, I had a manager one time who said that, oh, Minda, you're a utility player. You could play any role. I could just throw you anything and you could do anything. And when I thought about that, I was like, I have not been going to all these happy hours and situations for you to tell me I'm a utility player. I actually had to sit and think about, I don't want to be considered to just do anything. I want my colleagues and managers to be thoughtful about my career going forward. So what is it that I need to be doing differently or communicate differently to let people know this is where I'm headed, right? So that they can be participants in that. And so thinking about that brand strategy, no, I want to be looked at as a leader, not just someone you can pluck input in any position. And so when you're thinking about what that is, who do you need to make relationships with? I realized that the people that I had relationships with were not necessarily the ones that were going to help me get to that point, right? And so I think, again, kind of taking a look at where we're going, what we're saying, what we're communicating to others, and what can be helpful or not helpful is really important. But then the other thing too is realizing that sometimes, I think definitely as communities of color, we try to fit a circle into a square peg, and realizing, is this the space for me, right? Have I done all the things, or is this just an environment that I'm never going to be able to grow in, right? And we have to ask ourselves those really tough questions. And I think that one of my favorite authors, an activist, her name is Audre Lorde, and she said, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. These are things that you deserve. You put a lot into your career, right? So if it's not happening here, what relationships do you need to start building? So maybe it's in a different department, or maybe it's, you need a new sponsor or something like that. But thinking through that you belong in every space that you enter, but some spaces just don't deserve to have you. And we could keep doing all the things and still not get the results that we want. So at some point, we have to also decide that we might need to pivot a bit and go a different direction if we're going to get to where we want to go. Because at the end of the day, we can't keep spinning our wheels in spaces that are never going to see us and promote us.
Yeah, definitely. And we got another question too, that aligns to some of that too. How do you manage your work-life balance and the demand of building the social capital?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's even more important now because work and home have really collided. So you might not feel like you actually have any balance of any sort. I know I had a friend who was telling me she was so frustrated that she was having back-to-back Zoom calls that she didn't even have time to go to the bathroom. I said, girl, you're at home. You should got to create time to go to the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? Like we have to create the space, right? And why would you want to work somewhere that you don't even feel comfortable being able to like turn your camera off and go to the bathroom, right? Like, right. So part of it, again, is first we have to understand, what does good look like to us? What boundaries do we need to give ourselves permission to set, right? What if I'm working from, Monday through Friday, and at, 5 o'clock, I'm no longer responding to emails. Let's demonstrate to people what good looks like to us. I had another friend who their manager kept emailing them on Sunday night saying, do you think you can have a call? They had emailed at like 3 o'clock on a Sunday and like, can you meet at 10 o'clock at your time at night and have a conversation for something? And we were having this conversation. She's like, Minda, I just, this is happening every week. And I said, it's time that you're going to have a conversation about this, right? That this is not okay. And the more that you engage in it, the more that this person's going to think it's okay. So we have to also create our boundaries and let people know that, I am not working until Monday at 8 or whatever the case may be. And it's okay to say that, right? Because if dignity, humanity, equity, and respect are core pillars of our companies, then those are part of that too, right? And we can only say what we need. But first of all, we have to acknowledge that this is harming us, that this is draining us, that we can't do our best work when we're constantly feel like we don't have any space. And I think as communities of color, we have to normalize having these difficult conversations, but also we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to be our healthiest self, right? And so if the balance is, there may be times in our life where it's never like completely balanced, but you don't want it to always look like this, right? So what is it that you need to do to kind of make it a little more balanced? And if you can't say it, maybe it's having a conversation with someone else who can help you strategize on what it is. But again, everything really circles back to having a community in which you can have these conversations with, role play the dynamics, think about different solutions, because we need those spaces where we can have these conversations to acknowledge that these things are happening. And the more we're talking about it, then the powers that be that might be in the rooms can also hear and create resources so that our managers are also being aware of people's time and energy outside of the day-to-day.
Yeah. Awesome. I mean, I can't believe how fast this has gone. Like, we're almost at time. I don't want it to end because you have just these nuggets of goodness. What would be, just to end it up, what is your last piece of advice to this group on, just how we continue to lean in? I always think of your book and the memo when you say, if I keep leaning in, my head's gonna hit the table. So what is your last piece of advice for all of us?
Yes, well, again, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, Ashley, and all of you. The thing I would say is, think about it, the courage again, right? One definition of courage, the ability to do something that frightens one. Think about all the hard work that you've put into your career. Don't leave it in the hands of somebody else. Don't be ambivalent about your career, right? What are the steps that you're going to take today to get closer to your career goals? Think about what your short-term goals are. Think about what your long-term goals are. Think about who you need on your squad and have conversations with them. So when they think of things or opportunities arise, they think of you, right? But people can't think of you if they don't know what you're doing. And so just because we're in a virtual environment, don't put your career on hold. Don't say, I'll just wait till we get to the office. Somebody else has gotten promoted while you're thinking about that. Yep. So leverage people, have the conversations. Again, if you have people who are not, maybe your manager is not invested in your success, you create the agenda and let them know what you need. Ask for the stretch assignments. But again, we hold the keys to our career. And when we decide that we're going to lean into our courage, other people will be beneficiaries of it too.
That's such great advice. I'm already taking mental note. Like, let me jot that down. Thank you so much, Minda. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming here and speaking to us and, giving us all these tips and tricks. And, like Minda said, she has a book releasing tomorrow. She has the memo, she has the Right Within, and all of these books have tips and tricks and nuggets of just goodness in them. And I would encourage you all to go and get these books because they have helped me, I know. So I know they will help you. Thank you, Minda, so much.
Thank you so much. Rooting for everybody. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.